Actually, on the occasion of the official church visit of Archbishop Tapio Luoma and his delegation, we had a wonderful discussion with them this morning and lunch, and now we are ready to work after the mutual exchange. And this is a topic which is extremely important in the present Europe, how to be Christian in a multicultural society. I don't introduce anybody now because it is the task of my co-chair, so to say, but let me introduce him, Eero Yrjö-Koskinen, the director of FinnAgora, and he will chair the meetings, and I'm just happy to greet you as the host of this place. This is a church building, but at the same time we organize here conferences, and as you know, the international contacts and the ecumenical contacts for our church are especially important, so we understand this seminar also as a good signal of this cooperation. It's an international seminar. We have guests not only from Finland, but of course the most privileged guests come from Finland, but we have some visitors from Germany, the United States, and maybe some other countries. So welcome, and I wish you all and us all a very fruitful discussion. And I give the word to the director.
Thank you, Bishop Fabiny. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, on behalf of FinnAgora, the Finnish Institute in Hungary, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to open this seminar, which will deal with the role of minority churches in a multicultural Europe of the 21st century. So my name is Eero, Yrjö-Koskinen, and I'm the director of FinnAgora. I'm proud to say that we will have world-class speakers at today's event, including basically 3 archbishops representing the Finnish and Hungarian Evangelical Lutheran Churches and the Byzantine Catholic Church of Hungary. In addition, we will listen to the director of Hungarian Interchurch Aid, as well as to an associate professor from the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. Each of these distinguished guests will give a 15-minute presentation, after which we will take 1 or 2 questions from the audience if needed. And of course, I will try to follow that we will keep up with the timetable. After the coffee break, we will continue with a panel discussion which will be moderated by Metropolitan Ambrosius from the Finnish Orthodox Church, who is also the president of FinnAgora. And during the panel discussion, the audience will have, again, the opportunity to raise some questions if they wish. And we will try to finish the event by 5 p.m. So the discussion will be held in English. To the audience here at the venue, you will be able to listen to the discussions also in Hungarian, as we will have interpretation from English to Hungarian. As to the audience listening to us through our online channel, you will hear the discussion of the original language, in this case mainly in English, as we cannot provide interpretation through our stream. But once the recording is available, the presentations and discussions will also be translated and subtitled into Hungarian and eventually published on our website. At this stage, I would like to ask all the people here at the audience who are using the interpretation gadgets to check whether it works properly, and if not, you can change your device to another one. But now, let's move on to our first speaker, Dr. Tapio Luoma, who is the Archbishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. He will be speaking about how do Christian churches respond to present-day search of new forms of spirituality. Dr. Luoma, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. It is a great honor for me to be here and I'm flattered to be invited in this occasion. It is so good to see so many people here. What I am going to speak next is from a viewpoint from a majority church. As you know, my church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Finland, is a majority church in our country. But anyway, in my opinion and in my experience, the relation between our church and minority churches is very fruitful, and it is important for a majority church to be aware of the problems minority churches face. And so this is the background of what I'm going to say from the standpoint of my own church. And the subject is, as we heard, how do Christian churches in Finland respond to the present-day search of new forms of spirituality? And of course, my point of view is concentrated on my own church. Well, first, about these new forms of spirituality in Finland. What is the situation in this respect? Cultural and sociological changes concerning religion have been significant in Finland during the recent decades, although some of the changes have actualized slower than in other Western European countries. According to the International Social Survey Programme 2018, among 25 to 35 years old Finns, there were major changes in the belief of God. A third, 29% of women, and a fifth, 22% of men in this age cohort reported that they have given up their faith in God. This is something that also the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland has paid attention to. Commitment to church membership, belief in the way the creed represents, and participation in church events have weakened. Young adults do not belong to the church because of the habit. The membership must make a difference in their life. The perceived distance to the church, or the fact that one does not believe in the teachings of the church, has become an important reason for leaving the church in Finland, at least when it comes to the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. Even for church members, the religious world of the individual is independent and individual in nature. This is a significant change, but at the same time, nothing exceptional in the European context. Secularization is evident, for example, in European comparisons, where the younger generations are less religious than the previous ones. It is interesting that despite of these changes, many scholars have pointed out that secularization has not made such a breakthrough in Western culture as secularization thesis earlier argued. Rather, it is the question of changes of religiosity, not that religion itself has been vanished. Religion and spirituality have moved more into an individual domain, and at the same time, institutional religion has been declined in the society. Younger generations are not necessarily interested in belonging to religious institutions, and they may not believe in the God of Christianity, but they do believe in something. The before-mentioned International Social Survey Programme reveals that a quarter of the Finns reported that they do not follow any religion, but they are interested in the spiritual and supernatural issues. Similar results come from a Finnish survey, Gallup Ecclesiastica, from 2019, which indicates that there is a growing interest in the new spirituality, especially among the generations born in the 1980s and 1990s. Almost 1/4 from 15 to 39-year-olds so-called generations Z and Y, said that they believed in channeling. Other popular practices of this New Age spirituality along channeling are angel spirituality and various forms of energy healing. These practices are based on Western esotericism, Eastern traditions, and some psychological and therapeutic traditions. Alongside the esoteric type of spirituality, there is also a this-worldly form of new spirituality, which is actually much more widespread and common than esoteric New Age spirituality. It includes mindfulness, secular yoga and meditation, and self-help. Complementary and alternative medicine is often part of it. People who are oriented into new spirituality are often very critical towards institutional and established religions. They make a clear distinction between religion and spirituality. Generally, women are more oriented into new spirituality than men, so the survey says. The religiosity of young women in particular has changed in Finland in recent years. More and more young women see themselves as spiritual but not religious. This is noteworthy, since women have traditionally played a more central role than men in conveying religious tradition forward. They have taught the evening prayer and transported the children to church activities. The changed religious relationship of women is also likely to be strongly reflected in the religiosity of homes. On the other hand, according to the Gallup Ecclesiastica, younger generation of men in Finland are open to both alternative and Christian religiosity, which was a surprising result. Then some words about how the Church will respond to this challenge. What is the strategy of the Church? These major changes of religiosity have been noticed in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. The new strategy of the Church, called Doors Open, begins with the statement, "We boldly proclaim the gospel of Christ in a changing society and religious field. We use language that people understand. We recognize that meanings of faith, spirituality, mysticism, and personal experience." The strategy implements that the solution to the challenge is to be found in a bold Christian proclamation. One could also call it evangelization, in modern and comprehensible language, and in taking people's longing for spirituality and mysticism seriously. This is also a communication challenge. The strategy draws attention to the central role of social media in precisely those age groups most interested in new spirituality. The strategy says, "The views of the Church compete in the field of communication with all the views available globally. In spiritual matters, one does not obviously turn to the Church first. A more attractive and approachable vision may be found from anyone or anywhere else." The only way for a church to be heard in a contemporary society is via dialogue, not by trusting tradition or authority. Effectiveness must be sought through dialogue, moving from one-way communication to interaction in which everyone's personal views are valued, even if they are not considered equally right. The strategy Doors Open further states, throughout the history of the Church, the Christian message has been articulated in a new way according to each time and culture, language, emphasis and concerns. Alongside the means of communication, more theological reflection is needed. What is the Christian message for this era and for this global culture? This is the key question for churches when they face young people who are longing for spirituality and mysticism and seeking answers to the great questions of their lives. If the Lutheran Church in Finland has understood and has taken seriously the changing religious landscape, what have we done to it so far? Just to give a few examples. In November 2020, the Church Assembly decided to renew ecclesiastical language by changing the gendered titles and by instructing parishes and the central administration to use equal language in communication and administration. This summer, the Archdiocese of Turku, where I come from, together with the city of Turku, launched a new pilgrimage center. The Pilgrimage Finland is it called, which has attracted a lot of interest and positive feedback. The retreat association, the Friends of Silence, as well as Helsinki parishes are offering Christian yoga. In 2018-2020, the Church Board implemented the Baptism and Godfather project, the aim of which is to secure the position of baptism in the lives of Finnish families. Many more examples could be raised. Lastly, a few words of how to proceed. And this is now the difficult part. How do we proceed to the future? Worries about the future of the Church, the worries are not new. I think every generation has been worried about what is the future of the Church and how the young generation will respond to the challenge posed by the Church and how the spirituality of new generations is taken as part of the lives of the Church. As I said, we need to take people's questions and longing for spirituality seriously. Lutheran Pietism tried to renew the Church by asking one question: how do we ourselves must change? So that the change is not something that we expect from others, but how do we change? So that what we do and how we confess our faith would be more attractive and how we can give a valid testimony of our faith. We should invite people to participate in the rich tradition of Christian spirituality and not offer them just one form of spirituality. And I think, at least in the context of my church, attention must be taken from church to Christ. Attention must be drawn from church politics to realization of how to give testimony to Christ in this particular era. And finally, let me raise just one detail of this vast issue. In Finland and in church circles, we have had some talk about values. And I think that it is important that we have dialogue about values and we are interested in values. But somehow values also have the temptation to become a kind of slogan. Slogan by which we talk about European values, we talk about Christian values, modern values, family values, and so on. And my question in this situation, and when trying to articulate spirituality for the modern age, is that are we really called to proclaim values? Aren't we called to proclaim Christ, the risen Christ? This is not to say that values are indifferent. They are most important. But there are two problems I discern in the common language or way of speaking of values. There are values and they are not irrelevant. They are most important. But the problem is that, as I said, we have not been called to proclaim values, but the church is called to proclaim the risen Christ. But the second problem is that when we speak about values, we do not articulate in a detailed manner what we mean by these values. So whenever we speak about values to the younger generation, it would be very useful also to articulate what are the values. I referred to the new strategy of my church, and there are mentioned 3 values for the church, and I think they are very good also in this regard. And the values are faith, hope, and love. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Luoma, for your presentation. It was a very interesting overview of the situation in the Finnish church at the moment and the challenges that you're facing. Now, I understand you are also the president of the Finnish Ecumenical Council, and I was wondering while you were giving your presentation whether these discussions about new religiosity and new forms of spirituality have been discussed also within that context. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, in Finland, the ecumenical context is very fruitful, and our ecumenical council is very active. And there are lots of different, 5 or 6 different sections in our council, and for example, churches and the society, and then equality, the section of equality, and so on. And so there is a lot of discussion of this new phenomenon. So that the problem, I guess, is that the good work made in these sections, they should be better channeled to the use of the churches. But anyway, there is really thinking about these issues, and I think that our ecumenical situation supports very well the prospect of trying to find a good and relevant response to the challenges of younger generation these days.
Now I turn also to our audience. If you have any questions to Dr. Luoma, this is the opportunity. Of course, we will also have a panel discussion later on, but if there's anything that came to your mind, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. If not, we will move on to the next presentation. Yes, if not, we will move on to the next presentation. And this time I have the honor to invite Dr. Tamás Fabiny, who is the presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church here in Hungary, to give a presentation on our Christian compassion and understanding in a multicultural Europe. Dr. Fabiny, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the title is really Our Christian Compassion and the Understanding in a Multicultural Europe. In his writing, Night, Elie Wiesel guides us to a concentration camp where 3 people are hanged in public. 2 of them, the adults, die immediately. The body of the little people proves to be too light, so his agonies last for more than half an hour. Where is God now? Someone may ask. The author can hear the answer echoing in him. Where? Where is God? There he hangs on the gallows. I understand this sentence that God does not witness the suffering from a distant view, but takes his share in the suffering by the side of the human being. Even the prophet Isaiah is struggling to find the right words in depicting the servant as a paragon who was despised and rejected by people, one who experienced pain and was acquainted with illness. Christianity identifies the despised servant as Christ's prefiguration. In our understanding, these words have been fulfilled in Jesus. He had no stately form or majesty that might catch our attention, no special appearance that we would want to follow him. He lifted up our illness. He carried our pain. He was wounded because of our rebellious deeds, crushed because of our sins. The suffering of Jesus is a compassion. This was initiated already in the event of the incarnation. He came to what his own, but his own people did not receive him, says John in his gospel. And this was evolved throughout his life. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head, as Luke says. And finally, it was accomplished in the Passion story when Jesus said on the Golgotha, my God, why have you forgotten me?" Where is the place of the church today? It is in the company of the sufferer, at the edge, in the depth, in compassion. For this is the way of Jesus. This follows logically from the question, where is God? The only possible answer is this: it is where Jesus is. A disciple is not greater than his teacher. If the teacher is scorned, so is the disciple. If Jesus is poor, the church cannot be rich. If he resigns from power, his disciples cannot reign. If Jesus walks the way of the cross, the church cannot represent fame. If Jesus represents the Theologia Crucis, the church must not follow a Theologia Gloriae. The compassion of Jesus continues even after Good Friday at Easter. Besides showing his wounds to Thomas, means that even the resurrected Jesus had his wounds. And then he went to Galilee, to the land of Gentiles. Jesus doesn't want to stay exclusively in his own church, not even in Jerusalem or in at least between walls. As Pope Franciscus said in one of his sermons, quoting the book of Revelation, where the resurrected Jesus is knocking on the door, he said in his sermon, Jesus is knocking on the door of the church, that he, Jesus, wants to go outside the church. He doesn't want to remain within the walls of the church, but he wants to go outside. And Jesus was born on the brink, at the edge, far from the power center of the empire, not in Rome, nor in Jerusalem, but in the no-name Bethlehem. His incarnation was the gesture of solidarity itself. He dedicated his life and death to this. He kept consciously looking for the ones at the edge. It means sinners, lepers, women, and he went a long way again to the brink after his resurrection. Church is where Christ is. And where is Christ? Mostly among sufferers, the ill, in the valley of the shadow of the death. The followers of the resurrected Christ don't revolve around their own concerns anymore. Jesus rejects a church focused inwardly. His people, the church, cannot be an ecclesia incurvata in se. Christ's church has to be a church of compassion. Martin Luther discusses this in the so-called Smalcald articles as mutuum colloquium et consolatio fratrum. In an inclusive language, we would say fratrum and women as well, sisters and brothers. When I was installed as a bishop, I tried to summarize our mission in 2 words, according to these Smalcald articles. These 2 words are colloquium and consolatio. In the beginning, I kept emphasizing the importance of conducting a dialogue, that is colloquium. And I am still convinced that Church has to engage in a dialogue with representatives of other denominations or religions, even dissidents, even skepticals, or even atheists. And the second word is consolatio. I particularly find significant. Today, this is what compassion means. A consoling church is how we have to be present in the lives of the devotees, many of whom are ill, depressed, or struggling with the question of God, but also we have to bring compassion to the society's different layers who are left by the wayside. As Isaiah says, comfort my people. Or in the next passages, as a mother consoles a child, so I will console you. Let me stop here for a moment. This is the image of a woman, a mother. It is a, so to say, feminine metaphor. We have grown used to hearing the Bible talk about God in a fashion of manly and masculine metaphors, like Lord, Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and so on. On the other hand, God can be described with delicate feminine metaphors as well, as these words show. As a mother consoles a child, I will console you. Our God is, of course, neither man nor woman. Co-suffering, compassion, and mercy belong together. The Hebrew language uses the word rahamim for mercy, which is the plural form for the noun womb. Mercy somehow has to do with giving birth and the womb. In the Middle Ages, Anselm prompted the question, why did God become man? Cur Deus homo? His answer of theological length can be summarized only in 2 words, sola misericordia, only for mercy. Yes, God became a human only because of his mercy. Misericordia means the mercy. Let me give a concrete example for credible Christian compassion in a multicultural country, Hungary, in the 20th century. Gábor Stéló, who has been mentioned today already by our discussion, Gábor Stéló was a Lutheran pastor from Slovak origin, by the way, with excellent Finnish contacts. As a young pastor, he was not only busy in planting communities and building new churches, but based on Nordic example, he also established a so-called folk college for talented young farmers. That was his first period. In his second period, during the Holocaust, the Shoah, he sheltered and saved thousands of Jewish children, for which he was recognized later as having been one of the Yad Vashem's righteous among the nations. When the communists came into power, he founded the children's state known Gaudiopolis, and that is already his third period, the Gaudiopolis, the joy city, where he welcomed children of imprisoned people. After his refuge was deprivatized, he set forth to arrange the diaconical work, and that is the 4th period in his activities. He arranged the diaconical work of our church among disabled. If somebody, then Gábor Stéló was surely a man of compassion. All this has its social perspectives. Misericordia perfectit societatem, said our ancestors, which means that mercy makes society more perfect. Does it really bring into perfection? Is it not a misunderstanding to speak perfection in connection with misericordia? Matthew, the evangelist, really puts as follows, be perfect, Jesus says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. But Luke, on the other hand, the third evangelist, says, according to capital 6, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. To be realistic, I can say, in a multicultural society, one cannot be perfect, but can and should be merciful. According to the Old Testament, mercy became a social pattern in Israel, accommodating strangers, liberating slaves, protecting the underaged, widow and orphans, the poor and the ill was everybody's natural obligation. Let me bring an example from the book of Leviticus. If your brother becomes impoverished and is indebted to you, you must support him. You must live with you, he must live with you as a foreign resident. Do not take interest or profit from him, but you must fear God, and your brother must live with you. That is why, because of that attitude, the chosen people could survive. And this is the social dimension of the religion. As God keeps consoling us, so do we. As, so to say, consoled consolers, can we dwell in one another's company. A couple of years ago, the Taizé community released a booklet with the title, The Courage of Mercy. It discusses the social dimension of mercy as follows. The death of poor countries is often caused by more powerful nations and corporations exploiting their resources. Or other examples from this booklet. Across the world, women, men, and children are being forced to leave their homelands. Rich countries must become aware that they bear a share of the responsibility for the wounds of history that have led to massive migrations, notably from Africa and the Middle East. Finally, it is important to realize that even the influx of refugees and migrants creates difficult problems. This can be a positive opportunity. Those who knock on the door of countries richer than their own inspire these countries to live in solidarity with them. This is valid for the cohabitation of cultures, in my understanding. We as Christians should be leaven and salt in the society, and through that, we should help the cohabitation of cultures. We always emphasize that we, the Lutheran Church in Hungary, are a trilingual church with Hungarian, Slovakian, and German roots. Furthermore, our church has displayed distinct openness towards the Jewish people on numerous occasions. We maintain a conscious presence among Roma people in Hungary as well. The sole way of the future can be no other than cohabitation and reconciliation, mutual healing of the wounds of history, the unity of reconciled diversities. I strongly believe, and that is my final thought, I strongly believe that Eastern and Western societies and their churches can learn from each other. This very conference is a part of this learning process. We must, of course, beware of extremes. Both progressive and conservative position can be one-sided. A kind of balance is needed. A more progressive, so to say, progressive position, which can be characteristic more in the Western world, could be described with the following bon mot: if you marry the zeitgeist, you will soon become a widow. A more conservative position, on the other hand, referring always to the traditional, so-called traditional values, which seem to be present in a Central European context, should be, in my understanding, less offensive and show more mercy. What is needed now is not simply coexistence, but rather pro-existence. It is mercy that the Christian people can implement in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fabiny. Actually, I have two questions to you based on your presentation. I very much admire your idea of proclaiming cohabitation and reconciliation within our societies. And you also said that the place of the church today is in bringing forward compassion in our society. Now, I would be very interested to hear whether there have been any changes in the general perception of compassion in the Hungarian society during the past few years, and also in Europe in general, because of course you have been following these in the wider perspective. And the other question refers back to Dr. Luoma's presentation, who gave an overview of the latest developments in the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church and the general changes in religiosity and new spirituality. Have there been similar developments also here in Hungary? Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, I think I try to stand on the basis of Lutheran theology, and as I mentioned, Theologia Crucis is a deep teaching of Martin Luther, and he uses it against the temptation of Theologia Gloriae. It means that churches who want to follow Jesus should be really on his footsteps. And Jesus rejected the glory. Of course, he received the glory, but from God. And he rejected getting the glory from people. Some people wanted to raise him as a king, but he refused because he was crowned king by God. And the most delicious crown was on the Golgotha on his head when he was suffering on the cross. So he rejected the human power, the human influence, because that was not his way. He chose to be poor and remained on the side of the poor. And if the church wants to be faithful to Jesus, then we must also fight against that temptation, that we should be always on the sunny side of the world. And it is sometimes a temptation between churches that they might have a little rivalization in the society. I have more privileges, I have more opportunities, I have more money. I think the way of Jesus is not success and not getting more money and getting more influence, but to stay on and to remain on the side of the poor, of the weak, of the sick, and so on and so on. And the second question, yes, and we have these spiritual movements, fortunately, with a lot of international contacts. And I'm not saying it because of politeness, but we have learned a lot from Finland, from the Finnish spirituality in the last more than 100 years. There have been pastoral conferences and many other conferences, and we had the opportunity to get acquainted with the Körti movement, with the Lestadians and all the others. And some pastors have become influenced by that. Of course, life is changing, but we are very much watching this strategic paper Archbishop has mentioned, Door Opens, which is important for us. It is a temptation to close the doors in Central Eastern Europe especially, and the church should be a signal for door opens.
Right, we need to move on now to keep up with our timetable. So our next speaker will be Philip Gochees, who is the Archbishop of the Byzantine Catholic Church of Hungary, and he will be speaking about the Byzantine Catholic Church and its position as a bridge between East and West. Mr. Gochees, you have the floor.
Good evening. I'm very glad for your invitation. I'm very glad for your invitation. I hope I won't disappoint you with my presentation, because I got this task to give a little short presentation of our little church in minority in Hungary, the Greek Catholic Church. And during this preparation, I found a lot of very interesting details. So I will present I would like to show the presence of our church in Hungary, in the Carpathian Basin, and perhaps I speak least about the situation of today. But if you have some questions, I try to answer. So the Hungarian tribes migrated to the Carpathian Basin during the Great Migration in the 9th century. According to the Byzantine sources, they met Byzantine missionaries during their migration. Two of chieftains, Bulcsú and Gyula, were baptized in Constantinople in 1948 and 1953. And they returned accompanied by the Byzantine bishop called Yrjö-Koskinen. The mission of Bishop Yrjö-Koskinen unfolded mainly in the southern region of Hungary. The episcopal seat around this time may have been the ancient Sirmium, Szávos and Demeter, which in the 9th century was the episcopal seat of Pannonia. St. Methodius himself briefly held the title of Archbishop of Pannonia around 880. In his initial effort, King Stephen I pursued an anti-Byzantine policy, not for religious reasons, but because of the opposing Hungarian tribal leaders who had been baptized in the Byzantine rite. From 1018, the Kingdom of Hungary became directly adjacent to the Byzantine Empire. So the Saint King entered into an alliance with the Emperor Basil II, which was supposedly sealed by the engagement of his heir to the throne, Prince Imre, with the Byzantine princess. The identity of this princess is unknown. And what is the historical fact, however, is that King St. Ladislaus established a strong diplomatic relationship with the Byzantine emperor, and to this end married his daughter Piroska to the emperor's son, John Komnenos. The queen, known as the stranger, Irene in Greek, became a much-loved saint of the Byzantine Church, and like Saint Elizabeth, her worship is still very much alive today. Two of the very few remaining mosaics in the Hagia Sophia, portraying the two of them, can still be seen. In January 1028, Ioannes, then known as a metropolitan of Turkey, which refers to Hungary, in Greek, attended the Council of Constantinople in 1043. This is attested by a codex from Mount Athos and a codex from Paris. The document is worthy of note, if only because Metropolitan Ioannes' place on the list of bishops suggests that the Metropolitanate may have been founded by the Patriarch shortly before, at the beginning of the 11th century. The existence of the Metropolitanate is also supported by a seal preserved in Washington, which may have belonged to the predecessor or successor of his Metropolitan Ioannes. It was in this preparation for this little lecture that I learned that I'm not the first Hungarian Metropolitan in Byzantine Rite. The Greek language deed of foundation of the Veszprém Valley Women's Monastery founded by St. Stephen mentions the Metropolitan Monastery of the Most Holy Mother of God. This expression strongly suggests that the monastery was dependent on the Metropolitan, who in this context could not have been the Archbishop of Esztergom, but the Metropolitan of Turkey, under the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Constantinople. According to some assumptions, the royal coronation robe preserved in the Hungarian National Museum is embroidery of these Greek nuns. The coronation robe resembles a Byzantine liturgical vestment, the phelonion of the priest. Another indication of the significant influence of the Byzantine Church is the fact that the works of St. John of Damascus and Maximus the Confessor were translated from Greek into Latin in Hungary during this period. And from here, the translations spread to the monasteries of Western Europe. A further tangible evidence of the presence of Eastern monks is the cave monasteries of Tihony. Prince Andrew, later King Andrew I, returning from Kiev, brought a wife, Princess Anastasia, the daughter of Yaroslav the Wise, Grand Price of Kiev. She was accompanied by monks from Kiev. In the Pecheskaya Lavra in Kiev, which can still be admired today, the monks all lived in caves, just as their founders, Anthony and Theodosius, had started the monastic life here. After arriving in Hungary in 1046, they settled in Tihony and dug themselves cave dwellings, which can still be seen today. 10 years later, in 1055, King Andrew I founded a Benedictine monastery close to the caves in Tihony. Its deed of foundation is the first Hungarian language monument. There were written records of fraternal relations between Benedictine and Eastern monks. The last written record of monastic living in caves dates back to 1354. It is not clear whether the Eastern monks were still living there or whether the Benedictines were already using them as hermitage. In any case, it is an important historical fact that 200 years after the Great Schism of 1054, the effects of the schism were not sensible in the Carpathian Basin, and Eastern and Western monks lived side by side. In another area, further to the south, we also find evidence of the coexistence of Eastern and Western monks. According to the legend of Gellért, after the defeat of Oitony, a rival chieftain, the commander of St. Stephen, Prince Csanád, brought monks to the diocese of Csanád and settled them in Oroszlamos. Not far from there, he found Greek monks in Marosvár. For years, Greek and Latin monks lived together here as well. Later, Bishop Gellért moved the Greek abbot and his monks to Oroszlamos. Later on, the coexistence of the two rites in the diocese of Csanád during the time of Gellért did not cause any conflict. We also have indirect information about this from the legend of St. Gellért. With regard to the monastery of Sava St. Demeter, mentioned above, it is worth mentioning that according to a letter of Pope Clement VI, his abbot had been appointed by the Patriarch of the imperial city until 1334, who was the superior of the Greeks, Hungarians and Slavs living there. It is interesting to note that in the 1330s, Hungarian monks arrived at the monastic center of St. Gregory of Sinai, founded around that time in Parouria. This may be related to the decree of Clement VI of 1344. that the situation of the monastery without an abbot should be left to the Bishop of Nyitra, the Latin Rite. It is well known that during the Anjou era, the Eastern Church wasn't supported in any way in Hungary because by then it was considered to be a schismatic church. But the fact that, despite the jurisdictional rupture, some spiritual contacts still have been maintained seems to be confirmed by a document dated 1353, which tells of a vision of a certain monk, Krizsány György, in which the Jesus prayer practiced by the monks of hesychast appears regularly in this vision of this monk, Krizsány György. I find it very interesting. At this point, however, we can no longer talk of any kind of jurisdictional relationship between the two churches in Hungary. The presence of the Eastern Church did not, of course, cease, mainly due to the increasing and decreasing presence of refugees and merchants from Serbia and Greece, which also had a significant impact on Hungarian culture and church life. If we are looking for the Byzantine Christianity in communion with Rome, we have to fast forward to 150 or 200 years in history when the first unions took place. It is important to emphasize that the mutual excommunication linked to the date of 1054 was even more of misunderstanding, since Cardinal Humbertus, as papal legate, pronounced the excommunication not knowing that Pope Leon IX was already dead at that time, so his jurisdiction had ceased. Patriarch Michel Kerularius of Constantinople returned the excommunication, but the schism was actually completed in 1204 when the Crusaders occupied Constantinople and established a Latin emperor and patriarchate there. However, Oh, 2 minutes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Later on, unions of a different content began to emerge, bringing smaller churches and ecclesial communities into unity with Rome in a way that separated them from the Orthodox Church. Thus, partial unions are achieved, but the schism has not been revoked. I don't want to enumerate these union in separate place and time, but that was the so birthed the Greek Catholic churches. Okay. The Hungarian-speaking people in the Byzantine Rite continued to strive to have their own church organization. It was with this aim in mind that the Hajdudorog movement was founded in 1968, with the aim of officially conducting the Divine Liturgy in Hungarian, and to this end they wanted to establish their own eparchy. The first Hungarian liturgical translation emerged in the 18th century. None of the Hungarian Divine Liturgy, sings, books, or any other kind of Hungarian translation were officially approved and authorized until the Second Vatican Council. This movement was successful, although its achievements were slow and took many years of persistent work. The first Hungarian eparchy was established in 1912 by Emperor Franz Joseph II and Pope St. Pius X. I found important here to mention that among other Greek Catholic politicians who supported the establishment of the Hungarian Eparchy, there was two Protestant statements, Gábor Síje and Endre György, minister, who were wholehearted advocates of our case. Thus, in 1912, the first Hungarian Greek Catholic eparchy was established with Hajdú-Dorog as its seat. The administrative center was Debrecen. Okay, I leave it, I drop a bit. So, today, the Metropolitan Churches was founded 2015 by Pope Francis. He founded 2 new dioceses and the 3 an autonomous church in its own right, sui juris, the Greek Catholic Metropolitan Aid. Today, there are around 250,000 Greek Catholics in Hungary, led by 3 bishops in 3 eparchies, since the Greek Catholic Church was founded in the hope of unity between East and West, or our church, by its very existence, carries within itself the vocation of the unity of the whole church. We wish to be a bridge between East and West. One of the main foundations of this is that we are united with the Roman Catholic Church, but we are also united with our Orthodox brothers and sisters in our historical tradition, liturgical life, theology, and spiritually. As Pope St. John Paul II put it in his apostolic letter, Oriental Lumen, it is a task of Eastern Catholics to show and live the treasures of the Eastern Church within the Catholic Church. Thank you. Excuse me.
Thank you, Archbishop Gochees, and apologies for keeping up with the timetable. It was an interesting overview of the history of the Greek Catholic Church, and unfortunately we didn't have much time to dwell into the current situation of your church. I would be interested if you could just describe in a few words what is the role of the Greek Catholic Church today in the Hungarian society. Previously we heard the words cohabitation of minority churches. Has this cohabitation worked properly from your point of view, or are there still some schisms, as you mentioned in your presentation? And please feel free to comment if you wish.
Thank you for this question. Yes, of course, I find it's properly this coexistence today in Hungary. And as I mean, I I'm sure that we have a special task, if you like, in Hungary, because in spite of this, our church is a little church, the speciality, the Byzantine, the Oriental Church, of the Oriental Church is the faithful, to be faithful the traditions. And today in our area, in the modern life, people speak very little this worthy. What I mean is very important to keep the real tradition, and it can help not to not to lose the real way. And it isn't easy for us, because our worship lives in today. And one time the father of a big family said me that you, Bishop, you have to understand that to be Greek Catholic for the young, for the youth, it's a very difficult today. Don't make it more difficult, please, he said me. But I believe that perhaps it's more difficult. but it can keep or it can show that in the past, what are the really worthy in the past. So in few words I can explain so. And I think we are well known and well expected in Hungary with our this specialty.
Thank you. And obviously, if there are any questions from the audience, please raise your hand, and we will do our best to reply. But if not, we will continue now with the program, and we will move on to Hungarian civil society organization. Ms. Klára Keveházy, who is the Director of Humanitarian and International Development at Hungarian Interchurch Aid, will be discussing how they are promoting humanitarian aid and international solidarity in Hungary. Klára, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And may I first of all thank you, Bishop Fabiny, that you gave an excellent introduction to my presentation, as you provided the biblical background and biblical basis of all what we are doing at Hungarian Interchurch Aid. First. Okay, thank you. So let me start with a very personal introduction. All those who know me are aware of the fact that I have been very closely related and attached to Finland for 30 years now, both in my private life, my professional life, and congregational life. I have visited Finland, participated in exchanges, have organized visits, concerts. During those events, I always learned from my friends in Finland the love of nature, the love of their homeland, respect for their history, respect for their fellow beings. So I'm sure also this event will provide us a lot of things to learn and respect on. Therefore, it's a great privilege for me to stand here and present my thoughts on this topic that will also have many connections with Finland and the Finnish Church and our Finnish partner. In my presentation, I would like to introduce some important milestones of our work and give you an overview on the background of international humanitarian aid work in Hungary and present specific examples of campaigning promoting humanitarian aid. As you all know, until the beginning of the 90s, there were no NGOs in Hungary, and there was no tradition in Hungary of providing international humanitarian and development aid. What we had in the 60s and the 70s was the so-called bilateral technical assistance provided by the state to some friendly countries like Cuba and Nicaragua in the form of trainings, visits, exchanges. But it was not a humanitarian work. It was not in a classic sense. Also at that time, there were efforts by the churches and individuals to assist beyond Hungary's borders, mainly in Transcarpathia and Transylvania. The establishment of Hungarian Interchurch Aid in 1991 was a joint ecumenical effort by the Hungarian Protestant and Orthodox churches as a reaction of all the events that were happening in Central Europe at that time, Romania, Germany, Yugoslavia. International standards of humanitarian work have been transferred to HIA during the first years of its operation through an international advisory board. This transfer of knowledge was not a simple transfer of know-how, but it also included practical transfer of methodologies, education on solidarity, emphasizing joint responsibility of churches and the civil society. Since 1994, we have been a member of ECT Alliance, which has been a wide platform for exchanging knowledge and experience in the humanitarian field. Our organization was the first Hungarian NGO to coordinate significant international humanitarian project in a non-neighboring country. The first project was completed in Chechnya in the 90s, supported by several international donors within the ECT Alliance, and later on also by the ECHO, European Commission for Humanitarian Aid, in partnership with Finchurch Aid. Our strategy has always been to promote humanitarian aid based on our own experience, own practice, using different forms of advocacy and working on different levels. The first level is on the civil society level. HIA had a major role in the establishment of and management of HAND Association in 2003 for bringing together Hungarian NGOs in order to facilitate cooperation with the government. Another level has been the advocacy of HIA towards directly to the government, based on international experiences on those issues that are related to the implementation of humanitarian commitments. One of those most important achievements of these efforts has been the creation of the law for international humanitarian and development work. It was adopted in Hungary in 2014. Ensuring the legal background for development work abroad and providing NGOs with some alleviations from the strict Hungarian financial regulations for using governmental funding abroad. HIA and several other NGOs provided significant input into the content of the law. One of the major alleviations of the law is that in international development work, it is no longer necessary to apply public procurement procedures. One can apply simplified procedures, which is a great practical result of this advocacy work. The third important issue was the establishment of an independent agency for the implementation of humanitarian and development aid. What we see in the Nordic countries with Danida, Finida, and the like. It has been a long time before it was set up in Hungary, but finally in 2019, it was set up for the implementation of international humanitarian aid with the very unique mission of supporting persecuted Christian communities around the world. In 2020, HIA and Hungary Helps Agency, the new institution, concluded a framework partnership agreement with the aim of providing the fastest possible emergency assistance in different parts of the world through a mutually accepted strategy. Beyond the above platforms, we have a strong intention to promote the need for international development work through raising awareness on numerous programs, including youth events, congregational events, conferences, lectures, presenting our work and promoting solidarity. We have a special and very close relationship with the Lutheran Church. They are committed to international solidarity by joining our campaigns. Even our bishop has joined us several times in our field visits to Iraq so that he can witness and present his experiences and the need for humanitarian work himself in Hungary. We are using many platforms of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. While on the international scene we receive positive feedback on our work abroad, on our international work, some of the Hungarian public is critical of our international presence, saying that many people in need in Hungary lack assistance. Our response to these critics has always been presenting our national network of social institutions, providing emergency social and development assistance to those homeless people, families in crisis, addicted people, based on a contract with the government. Namely, our social development work that has been carried out in Hungary since the middle of the 90s, with 50 institutions in 24 locations of Hungary, has been a good example for demonstrating the balance in our work. As both of the international and local assistance are laid down in our statutes as our basic mission, we do our best to reach out to the most vulnerable ones in both areas with a clear division of tasks as to funding and communicating our activities. And in order to focus on promoting solidarity, I would like to present 3 of our campaigns carried out in Hungary recently. In 2006, HIA started a long-term development education program under the brand of You Also Shape the World. Within the scope of this significant project that has been elaborated and implemented with the professional assistance of development education experts of Interchurch Aid, our aim was to address teenagers at about 50 secondary schools in Hungary and in Finland, and tell them in a very simple way why and how we work in the international arena. We had very simple installations where pupils could see how their peers in Afghanistan live their everyday lives, what the differences are between living in Europe and living in Afghanistan, and why is it necessary to assist youth and the needy in developing countries. The objective of this project was to raise public awareness and mobilize support for development issues with a special focus on those priorities of HIA's work, education and eradication of extreme poverty. In this project that was supported by the European Commission, HIA have developed its unique development education concept called 10 Minutes of Solidarity. One comment here. The issues and region of Afghanistan seemed that time very far and very exotic for all the students, even for us maybe, and the average Hungarian citizen. By now, with the expansion of the role of the internet, social media, and all the global events around us, it has come much closer to us. Human sufferings in any places of the world are here with us closer than ever. We can think of the latest events in Afghanistan that came so close to us, we could even be part of the evacuation efforts, and now we have 19 of our regional staff members here with us and with their families here in Hungary. Solidarity can even be put in practice this way. Furthermore, connected to the World Water Summit in Budapest 2013, we have developed a campaign with the title of How Long Would You Walk for a Glass of Water? That was the question we posed with an interactive display at the conference. Featuring a treadmill and a pair of water-filled jerrycans, we encourage participants to take up the burden and get on the treadmill as a gesture of solidarity with the Ethiopian girl or woman who walks 10-15 kilometers a day with 20 liters of water on her back to provide water for her family daily. This awareness-raising installation was a real success that was taken to several events, schools, reaching out to youth and adults alike by bringing global issues very close to the facilitating discussions on the topic and in many communities. Finally, my last example is a short sand animation movie that has been made within a significant EU-funded project that is currently being implemented by HIA in Iraq. The short film, with the title of The Demolisher of the World and the Restorers, is a tale on building the resilience of those who stay in the country. The tale is about the devastating evil in the world that wakes up from time to time to destroy the lives of innocents and ruin the lives of families. Not far, far away, but here, closer than we may imagine. It is a tale about the good in the world that doesn't give up. They hurry to rebuild, heal, bring hope for the suffering, not as a kind of fairy, but through people with the power of collaboration as the main mission, what we also are implementing. The story, written by János Lackfi, the Hungarian famous author, was inspired by the international Kudra program launched by the EU following the war in Syria, which aims to give families who have fled the devastation a chance to return, restart, and rebuild. The three characters in the tale, Ali, Emid, Avin, are real internally displaced persons in Iraq who have been given the chance by Hungarian Interchurch Aid to restart their lives under the Kudra program in their homeland. During our work of international humanitarian aid and development work in Hungary, we have seen that people, especially young people, are getting more and more interested and committed towards international solidarity. This is what inspires us and guides us to continue our commitment and fulfill our mission day by day. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara, for your interesting presentation on your activities both here at the national level and also internationally. I would raise two questions to you again. And one refers to the fact that you have a balance between the two, both in Hungary but also internationally. You mentioned that you have some 50 locations here in Hungary where you are operating, but I would be keen to hear how many are there at an international level. So this is just one question. What comes to your comments or the criticism that you have faced in Hungary regarding your activities abroad, I would reply in the same way as many Finns have done to similar criticism to our own development aid, that by providing solutions in those locations abroad, you can actually avoid the mass immigration that, on the other hand, these people are very much afraid of. So, you know, this is perhaps just one way to approach things. But the second question relates to the picture that you showed a minute ago about this Ethiopian girl who walks 10 to 15 kilometers per day to search for the daily ration of water to her family. I have been closely involved with the environmental movement in Finland, and I'm quite aware that droughts may be a problem in southern and eastern European countries in the next few decades. Has this been ever raised within your activities? So if you wish to come back, please.
Thank you. There were so many questions. I tried to summarize. So the first question referred to our activities abroad and in Hungary. So in Hungary, we have been established a network of social institutions, as I said, in almost nationwide. And meanwhile, we were working on the international arena. Currently, our big priorities are Central Europe, what you were asking also, Ukraine. This is a big priority, especially during the COVID times. We have been assisting our neighbors with providing medical assistance, ventilators, fertilizers, and so on. No, disinfectants, not fertilizers, sorry. This is the first thing. The second big priority is Iraq, as I have mentioned. It has started, and it is connected to the question you raised, migration and refugee issues. We established our field presence in Iraq in 2016, just right after the big migration crisis, recognizing the need for local assistance and the need for assisting these people in order that they shouldn't leave their homelands in Iraq. Our next big priority is Afghanistan, where we have been present for 20 years now. So we have been following all the events, and we have established a small NGO in Afghanistan. And we do have the hope now that we can restart our activities now under different name and different modality, but with the same intention to help those in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we move on to our last, but certainly not the least speaker. We will hear Dr. Georgie Fabry, who is an associate professor and the head of social communication research group at the Faculty of Education and Psychology in the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. He will be speaking about the role of minority churches in the development of the Hungarian society. Mr. Fabry, you have the floor.
Dear my sisters and brothers, after the theological presentations of our bishops, my speech will address mainly sociological considerations in response to the request of organizers. I will analyze the role of minority churches in Hungary from the point of view of a social researcher. The mere number that is too high, I know, and often distressing, provokes an aversion, as if we ignored the work of the Holy Spirit, the salvation, or the call of Christ. For this reason, I kindly ask you to take statistics for what they really are. They help us understand the circumstances of the presence of the Holy Spirit. They enable us to find out how we can make use of our own little force in building up our Christ follower church and also in the mission work. The role of the minority churches in the development of Hungary is determined by historical factors, among which we can proudly bring the example of the Edict of Torda. Torda is a city in Transylvania, and that was the first law in Europe that guaranteed religious freedom of all registered religions in the 16th century. Of course, there were some not too nice relationship between Roman Catholic Church and Protestant churches, but it is the past, of course. And we will talk about the present. The present. We are watching the numbers. In the first part of my presentation, I will try to describe the situation of minority churches through the analysis of data. Then, considering this data as a framework, I will draw the consequences regarding the situation of minority churches. First, which are the minority churches in Hungary? It seems obvious at first glance, since the categorization of churches is reflected in the data of the national census 10 years ago. The next census will be organized the next year. You can see the data in the projected picture. Nevertheless, I suggest another series of data as a starting point. My argument is the following. Today in Hungary, it is the Christianity itself that is in minority. Not only one Christian church. At the time of this census, a slight majority considered themselves to belong to one of the churches. If we apply the models of vital demographic events, calculating with a 10% decrease at a minimum, our forecast will show by now, this time, that only less than half of the population would have the response in case of a new census next year. Of course, we are aware of secularization. We experience it everywhere in the Western world. Even in deeply religious countries, like the USA, for example, we can observe that in the case of the previously stable and vigorous minority churches, mainly evangelical congregations, for example, people and the church are drifting apart at a growing rate. The same applies in Europe, of course. There is no way for me in this conference to talk about the causes and the theological or social aspects. I will only shortly mention that pursuant to the religious boom of the churches after the collapse of the communist regime in the East European countries, we needed to realize that the general religious trends of the Western civilization would not stop at the frontiers. If we consider the definition of minority church in a narrower sense, then all the other congregations beside the Roman Catholic Church have some sort of specificity that is characteristic of the social presence and impact. For example, in the case of Reformed, Calvinist, or the Greek Catholic churches, this is mainly the geographic location. The national attachment, Russian, Romanian, Serbian, of the different Orthodox religious communities is strong. That is to say, the minority churches can play an important role in the preservation of the national identity and terribly in foreign policy, the community building of certain regions, cultural identity, in the implementation of social and educational functions handed over by the state. However, from a broader perspective, as regards the future viability of the church, I will use some statistical data about the average age. These data show the characteristics by age groups. It is the elderly people who belong to churches. In the case of minority churches, it means a bigger problem, since the lower number of the young people results in the termination of new supplies stemming from family socializations. We can observe that the three biggest Christian congregations or churches belong to the oldest age group. The average age is around 45 years, while half of the followers are under 40 years in the smaller religious groups. The reason for this list lies in the number of the children. The same phenomenon is reflected in proportion of birth numbers. For the minority churches, this value is significantly higher by 15 or 20% compared to the bigger churches, and especially higher compared to those not belonging to any churches, maybe 30 or 40% higher. These trends cannot, however, compensate the age characteristics of the society as a whole. 70% of the population over 60 years of age declared that they belonged to a church, while less than half of those under 14 said the same. According to the data of representative national youth survey, on a large sample, a maximum of 6% of the younger age groups consider themselves to be religious based on the definition of the church. Only 6%. It's very important. And of course, it is not only the proportion, but it is not only about the proportion, but the number is very important. It means that the churches can only count on approximately 150,000 young followers aged between 10 and 30 years across the entire country, entire Hungary. The introduction of the mandatory choice of any kind of religious education has not resulted any actual change. For example, the number of students enrolled in first grade to the Lutheran religious education at school decreased by a fifth, and at the same time, the number of confirmation is stagnant. In general, it is the fragmentation of religious education that sweeps away children from the minority churches that are unable to provide total education coverage. I would like to talk about one more factor of the room of the movement opportunity of minority churches, the economic potential. Among us, who did not indicate that they belonged to any of the church, among those who did not indicate that they belonged to any of the churches, the proportion of the economically active people is significantly higher than for the most of the churches. This rate also higher for the larger part of minority churches compared to bigger churches. It is striking that the economic activity of women in case of large majority of churches is significantly lower than the country average. This is partly due to the willingness to have children, partly due to age characteristics, but maybe we can observe the prevailing traditional female roles in the strategies of organizing life with traditional community. Data on the donations, data on the donations of 1% of personal income, you know it is a special Hungarian form of the church financing. We can donate or tax or personal tax for churches, 1%. Provided with information about certain church internal and external social power to call. In this field, minority churches have an impressive advantage. The number of people claiming to belong to the church exceeded in the number of donors by a rate of 1.5 or 2, which shows a strong inner connection and at the same time social sympathy and influence. The reason of the analysis of all these socio-demographic and statistic data is to describe the conditions that determine the role of minority churches in the present and near future in Hungarian society. In the closing part of my presentation, I have 2 minutes, it is perfect. In the closing part of my presentation, I will say about some statement. First, there are my thesis. Preaching Christ and mission. Sociological data also speak of the word longing for Christ, but we as church cannot offer the good news, the gospel to millions of religious in their own way, in an acceptable, shocking way. Second, theological authenticity and quality. Tradition alone, tradition is very important, but tradition alone gives less and less validity to the denominational division of Christianity, I think. Of course, or rituals, my wife is a Greek Catholic, or rituals or dresses, is very important and give very important feeling. But the straying power soon wears this. As a minority church, my question is, as a minority church, are we capable of taking action in our own right, not supported by our size? Second, the self-sustaining church maintenance. This is primarily a theological biblical question, I think. The Hungarian Lutheran Church also formulated the program of the economic independence of the congregation on this basis, on biblical and theological basis. Fourth, God and emperor. Of course, since from the former follows the relationship with the current state power. Civic loyalty and commitment to serve the community are evident for us. But are we able to be partners with mundane, so temporal, powers without theological self-abandonment and creed element, that is idolatry, as the bearer of the cause of those entrusted to us, even in a prophetic role, that is conflicts? Or I think it is a test for society. Those liberal democracy, which has its origins of the idea of religious tolerance, of course, provide the conditions for the free exercise of faith, the rule of law, and the protection of minorities. We know not other kind of democracy that can do this. Fifth, the Christ and the political Christianity. The logic of political Christianity Evangelical develops fault lines in tempers with churches that are not based on theology or credit. Political Christianity gives minority churches room for maneuver in the shape they pursuit of Christ biblically and in the true sense of Christian freedom. And the last, moral values and the social issue. This is not the first time that the Roman Catholic World Church has felt the turn of the zeitgeist, when it has elected a church head representing the social issue. I think it is a challenge for us too, for the minority churches too. Yes, in summary, minority churches are still part of the Hungarian social reality as an opportunity rather than a problem. Recalling the opening thought, the spirit of the Edict of Torda remained unbroken, and in the period of the loss of credibility of the formal practice of religion, minority churches can be encouraging to re-establish the ecclesiastical form of religious self-expression. Our job is to find the focus of this where the teaching of Jesus reaches us all deepest. To this end, enriched by the experiences of the World Eucharistic Congress with a strong message, I think, for us too. The year of the Lutheran year of the Lord's Supper, the Holy Spirit sent a clear and unambiguous direction. Follow small or large. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fabry, for your excellent presentation. And actually, I would suggest that we maintain the last slide with some of the questions related to challenges and opportunities so that we can come back to them during the panel discussion. Because right now we're a bit late in our timetable, so I would suggest that we break now for the coffee break and come back at 1:15 so that we will still have 45 minutes for the panel discussion. And then when you go for a coffee break, you can also sign up for the FinnAgora newsletter and other events if you want to receive to your email information on our activities. So please do so, sign up for our activities, and we will take up your personal contacts. At this stage, I also want to mention that during the panel discussion, there will be the possibility for simultaneous interpretation. So if some of the panelists prefer to reply in Hungarian, that is possible because we have the devices to do so, and the interpreters will do their best to then interpret the discussion also to English. So for all the participants, I would ask you to take the device with you when you come back from the coffee break so that you can listen to either language, because the interpreters will help us to do so. Thank you, and we'll come back at 4:15. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is good that you remember how it was 50 years ago. People don't know, but you used to be a student, or a young pastor actually, coming from Finland, and you visited the Theological Academy at that time, which is now the university, theological faculty, and it was really in this very house. And I was a young man at that time, a student or a teenager at that time. And of course, that was exactly the time when I had to decide if I would become a pastor or not. And I remember what a great challenge it was to me. Many people warned me. Many people said, oh, that is, it doesn't have any perspective. To be a pastor in the present so-called communist society doesn't have any perspectives. But I personally was very committed, and I understood it as a challenge to be a Christian in a society, because people didn't necessarily like the idea that the church was present. And after the political changes, it was totally different in the early 90s. The church was tempted, I refer to my presentation, to be on the sunny side. And we had, of course, a lot of new opportunities. We were able to renovate this house, and new schools, and diaconal institutions, and so on and so on. But I think and personally it is a warning for myself, we must not forget of the situation when the church was in an unpleasant situation. Where the church was not very supported. On the contrary, it was sometimes an unpleasant feeling to be Christian in a society. Störfaktor, as the Germans say. What is Störfaktor? Zavaró tényező, valaki segítsen. A disturbing factor. And I think the church has to be a disturbing factor again. If we are too much accommodated with the society which is surrounding us, if we feel too much comfortable in that, and if we are very, very supported both financially and in many other aspects, then something might be wrong with us. So it is a warning that the church must not remember the difficulties. And that is one reason why I personally support the work of the Interchurch Aid, because they are so much among persecuted Christians. And when I saw them in Iraq and other occasions with the Lutheran World Federation in Nigeria, how it is to be a Christian in a hostile environment, then I said they are perhaps more Christian in their attitude than we in Hungary, because we are too much accommodated to the society. So we must not forget the difficulties.
Sorry. Oh, okay.
First of all, Archbishop Tapio speaks about mysticism and new openness in church, and focus on the spiritual core of the church and her mission. And then Dr. Georgie Fabry speaks about sociological organizational roles and the larger role of the church in society. And now Bishop Tamás takes an anarchistic approach. Church must be a disturbing factor. How do you reconcile these three approaches?
Okay. Well, for my part, I think that these do not exclude each other, because I think that the role of the church is quite colorful. When the incarnation happened, when God came man as Jesus Christ, it meant that Jesus Christ took upon the human form and consented to the rules of the created order. And I think that this means that also the church, as an expression of God's incarnation in a way, must also try to take into consideration all the aspects of the present time and present society. And sometimes it means confrontation, sometimes it means that the church has to be a means of building peace in the society, and sometimes it means that the church also has to think how to secure its own possibility of functioning. So that I think that these viewpoints are not actually excluding each other, but perhaps complementing each other. A very Lutheran view, I think.
First, when Tamás Bishop began his work, his his ministry in 80s, of course, the minority churches, the churches, were not two preferred organizations, but the pastors had more and more higher respect and propriety in the society than now. The Central Statistical Office, that is an official Hungarian data office, has a longitudinal research about the respect and about the propriety of professions. In the 80s, what do you think? In the 80s, on which grade was the pastor in this list? It is a very long list, very long, maybe 200 professions. What do you think? Hanyadik volt? In 80s. It was the third place. And today, 65s today. I think it is very important, new phenomenon. And I agree with Mr. Bishop, because, of course, the churches, the Lutheran churches, of course, have very many calls, but I think we have to show the boards. We have to show the demarcation. What is the Christianity and what is not Christianity? And I think that we have to think about our borders. What do you think? Maybe against the popularity.
From the 60s to the 80s, Bishop Yrjö-Koskinen
I think I would pass the word to the bishops.
Please repeat the question.
My question is the following. From the 60s to the 80s, Archbishop Yrjö-Koskinen was always about the Diaconal Church. And I basically asked from Clark, also from you, how do you see the role of the church today in relationship to the focus on diaconia as was advocated by the predecessors of Bishop Tamás?
Yes, to be servant is a quite task for all Christian. Jesus speaks about it. So it remains, of course. But how to serve? What like to serve is this diaconate? How find the really place this diaconate in the social? It is a question. So today is really in Hungary. In Hungary, the difference is very, very quiet and very clear before during the communism and after the communism. Before the communism, the Christian was suppressed, and now it is helped by the government. And I think it isn't a bad situation that the churches are supported in several levels and several aspects. The role is to find a really task in this situation. So it's of course that to return and to refine every time this role, this task to be servant. Let me take a simple example. For a person, a young person who feel this vocation to be a servant and to become pastor or priest or monk, it's a very nice way. And he decided to become pastor or priest or monk. And with time, he will become a well-known person, and he got the respect more and more. And during this development, this time, he can alternate. Is good this word. So távolra kerül a céltól, az hogy mondanád? Get far from this nice first vocation. So it's a very, very simple and very human event. It is something similar in the church. So the church feel his vocation during the suppressing, for example, and there is a danger to get far from this first loving what is in the Apocalypse, in the Apocalypse, that you have you forget the first loving, no? So this danger is every time for the person and for the church as well. But our task to take all possibility and all possibility to realize what God asks from the person or from the church. So our task to useful this possibility, but in the good sense, and we have to return every time for the first loving.
So maybe one sentence that the role of the churches haven't changed. Only they have to find new ways, and they have to adapt to the current situation and establish those structures that can be appropriate to reach out to the vulnerables.
May I add just one more sentence, because you refer to Bishop Cardia. Many people don't know him in this church. So he was a very strong bishop with a very ambitious style of leadership, sometimes very close to a kind of dictatorial or authoritarian leadership. And we know that he was very much collaborating with the state as well. But he had a vision for the future. And in spite of all his weaknesses, he has done his best in order to survive for the church. But the greatest problem was that he emphasized diaconia, that was your question, as a kind of must. Church must be servants, and that was the reality in the communist time, and it was one-sided. I personally support diaconia very much, all kinds of diaconia. That I try to speak about that in my paper. But there is the other side of the coin is the freedom of faith, of belief. Martin Luther says that the freedom of a Christian person is that he or she is free in his or her faith, and he is the servant of everybody in the deeds. And if there is only reference to the deeds and of the serving, and we forget about the freedom of faith, then it is one-sided. So we have to represent both.
This afternoon here. Did they ring a bell to you as a Finnish bishop?
Well, it was so interesting to listen to them. And of course, the mindset of being a member or a leader in a minority church, of course, is differing from the mindset, for example, what I have. And that was so interesting to listen to you and try to understand the situation and context where you are living. I just wonder that the ecumenical activities in our societies is most important, so that we could find a common voice as churches together, in diaconia, in international helping systems, and in many cases. And I guess that the challenges of nowadays, I don't think they are very much different to a majority church when compared to the challenges faced by minority churches. I just think about our own Orthodox Church represented by Metropolitan Ambrosius and the good connection we have with each other as two Finnish national churches. I guess that what affects one church in a society affects in a way all other churches. And we share the same reality, and I guess that it is in the interest of all of us to find a way in order to have an influence in the society and also towards the state. Of course, our relations to the state differ very much, and I guess that in Hungary there are lots of churches, and the big Roman Catholic Church, and then the Reformed Church, and the third one is the Lutheran Church, and so on. So we have learned today, and I guess that every church has a point to make to the society and also to the state. And these are the issues that interest me quite a lot. What does it mean to be a church leader or a church member in a minority church in a society like Hungary or in a society like Finland? I guess it is important we can share our experiences and thoughts about this.
As a member of a small minority church in Finland, I should say that most minority churches should come to Finland to learn how the Lutheran Church of Finland treats us as minorities.
if I may continue, as far as I know, in the Catholic tradition there is an expression sharing the gifts. And I find it very important. All churches have their own gifts, their specialities, either more intellectual or more spiritual, or a commitment to the Bible or commitment to the liturgy. And it is very important that we can learn from each other and we can share what we have. I never forget what Pope Franciscus said, not now in Budapest, but when we met in 2016 in Lund for the preparation for the Reformation anniversary. In his sermon, he referred to Martin Luther, and he said that the commitment of Luther to the Bible is something that is a good example for all the Roman Catholics. And at the same time, we said that we can learn from the Roman Catholics and from the Greek Catholics, of course, speaking about the liturgy and all the treasures you have in your old tradition. So sharing the gifts is something very important. And one more. I think it is fantastic if we say that credibility of a church can be measured on the behavior of her behavior about smaller churches. If she is too proud and not supporting the small one, or on the contrary, they want to support the small one. I think it's something very biblical. In 1 Corinthians 12, we have this image about the body, the different parts and one head. Jesus is the head, and all parts of the body are important, the smaller and the bigger parts. And if there is sorrow for one body, it is the pain for the other body as well. And if a body has joy, the other one shares the joy. So the image of body in 1 Corinthians 12 is very, very actual. That's why I'm trying to speak about ecumenical solidarity. The solidarity among churches sometimes.
And I think we should have more than solidarity. We should have mutual understanding and sharing and love, and a bit challenge also. But anyway, it's not, I agree what you say. But another question to Clara, because in the Church Aid, the Lutheran Church has always, if I understand correctly, played important role in Hungary. How is the role of other churches as part of Interchurch Aid today?
Yes, I mentioned the Lutheran Church as myself being a Lutheran, so it's important for me. But I think during this work we have always felt that they are with us, and they were the ones who didn't establish their own aid organization. The Reformed Church, the Baptist Church, and some other churches have established their own institutions for international aid. But we have a kind of agreement that we work together and we do our international work together. So it gives us strength and very, very smooth cooperation with them. And I hope it will go in the future as well.
My question is there any competition between these institutions,
We have, within our work in Hungary, we have established a kind of coordination platform to coordinate our activities, and also on the international arena we try to coordinate with those big organizations, the Maltese and Carpathian. So it is fixed that we are working, for example, in Iraq. They are working in Syria. So it's a very good method to find regional coordination platforms.
Okay. You have a microphone there. You're going to have a microphone from here. Perhaps Archbishop Tapio will answer, because the question is related more to your church than to some others, and you face this paradigm today concerning the future.
Thank you for the question. If I got it right, you were asking about the role of repentance in the life of the European churches. And I like the question, and I like the way you put it. I mean, when Christ was among people, he asked them to repent. The English word repent presence of the Holy Spirit. We need a fresh understanding of the role of Jesus Christ. And whenever we say as European Christians, Jesus is the Lord, we should mean it and be serious about it.
Yes. Thanks for pointing out. I didn't see.
Okay. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hello, and thank you for the representations that you had. And my name is Satu. I'm former exchange student, and now I'm living currently in Budapest. My question is mostly targeted to Tapio Luoma, but I guess it will be for all of the participants, since what I've understood, it's a question here in Hungary as well. From the representation of Tapio, this one story came to my mind when I was working with the youth in the confirmation camps, and one of the young girls said to me that she cannot participate in the work of the church because her values are very different what she sees, what the church represents today. And when I asked her that, what are your values then? She brought freedom, love, respect, and caring for other people. So the very same values that the church supports. And this, of course, brought to my mind that what has happened between the young people nowadays and with the church, that they support the very same values, but at the same time the participants in the work of the church is coming lower and lower. So my question is that what do you interpret of what this problem is occurring from, and how can we as a church trying to find these people back at the church where we support the very same values? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think that this is the most acute problem at the moment when we think about how to reach young people in the Finnish Lutheran Church. Yes, it just happened to my mind just a couple of months ago that when what I tried to say in my presentation, that the problem of values is something that really it bothers me. And I think that you are just right when you say that many young people, they have actually very Christian values when they say that they want to see people love each other and be compassionate about each other and be truthful towards each other. I think these are very, very Christian values. But I wonder, and this is not the problem in my opinion, that as a church and as especially we who are committed church members and church workers and we are confessing believers. So is our testimony such a testimony that it is a calling, it is a warm welcoming for people and can come to the communion where we can share these values, which we actually have as common. And so I think that this is, well, we just talked about the repentance. I guess this is one of the points where we can look at ourselves in the mirror and ask, what kind of life do I conduct? So that, how should I live and how should I behave? How should I talk and use words? So that what I do or say does not make people go away from the church. And really, this is one of those points where we need repentance.
I think we should finally come to the end of this conference. I express our thanks to all the speakers and also to the participants during this afternoon. And I request the director of FinnAgora to give us closing remarks.
Thank you, Metropolitan Ambrosius, and thank you for the panelists for your interesting discussion. First of all, I want to wind up the discussion today by emphasizing the multifaceted role of the present-day church, whichever congregation you represent. Apart from cohabitation between each other and the society, the church needs to show compassion and, if necessary, be prepared also to confront existing views if they are in contradiction with the traditional role and message of the church, which is to support the poor and the needy. I want to thank our distinguished guests and speakers today for a very interesting seminar. I'm certain that this kind of discussions are necessary also in the future. And of course, I strongly urge you to continue your work in this field and strive in the direction that I just mentioned. Before closing this seminar, I want to express special thanks on behalf of the Finnish ambassador in Hungary, Mr. Markku Virri, who could not join our event today, but sends his best regards to all the speakers and, of course, the participants to this seminar. Finally, I want to thank once again all the audience for participating to this event, and special thanks to Clara Balicia and our hosts who made this seminar possible. Our cooperation has been excellent, and I look forward to continuing in that direction. Thank you, and I wish you a pleasant autumn.